The first question is already received for Keith. The question is, because Hong Kong is already so, the density is already so high, wonder if there will be any more room for, expansion. If yes, how?
Yeah, that's a good question. And one very topical in Hong Kong at the moment as we seek to improve the standards, living standards of our people in Hong Kong. I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but our living standards for our general people in Hong Kong are actually quite low. The average residential space that somebody in public housing, in which 40% of our people are in public housing, is only 6 square meters per person. So extremely low indeed. Okay, so is Hong Kong dense? Well, the answer is no. Hong Kong is not a dense city when we look at all of our land. We have 1,100 square kilometers of land, and what is the impression you get when you fly into land in Hong Kong? Quite often you'll have flown in over the whole of Hong Kong before you land, and when you look down, what you see is greenery. You don't see many buildings until you actually pass over the harbour itself. 75% of Hong Kong land is not built upon. We have only built on 25%. And whilst 40% of our land is fortuitously country park, and that's what makes all that greenery and hillside, we have another 30% that is not built upon, is in the new territories. And it's largely flat land. It's been sequestered by several usages: scrap metal merchants, container storage yards, and a few other fairly strange functions. These things are rented out by the old indigenous villagers of Hong Kong, who have quite a stranglehold on the land in the north of Hong Kong, in the new territories. And what the government is trying to do now, because for the last 25 years, since Hong Kong was handed back to China, there has been very, very little housing development in Hong Kong. In fact, there has been zero net increase in Hong Kong in housing since 2000, although our population has grown by over 1 million, from 6.5 to 7.5 million people. So our standard of living has gone down. So the short answer is, yes, there's a lot more land. We've only built on 7% of our land for residential use. Singapore has built on 30% of its land for residential use. Hong Kong is 1,100 square kilometers with 7 million people. Singapore is exactly half of that, 550 square kilometers for 3.5 million people. Exactly half the population, half the land, and therefore exactly the same density. But what is the impression you get when you go to Singapore? Greenery, openness, relatively low density, high quality of life. I would urge you to visit some of the less advantaged areas of Hong Kong and look at the way that Hong Kong people are living, and put your support behind the huge effort the government is carrying out now to attempt to get land back in the new territories in order to afford our people with the quality of life that they deserve for a first world city.
Thank you. There's another question is for Elaine, because Hong Kong is very good at arbitration, but then the question is, if the Chinese company, especially the state-owned companies, if they don't want to use Hong Kong law, then would there be any advice to, to make, how to put in our contract, etc., to protect ourselves or use Hong Kong arbitration?
Well, I think this is a very good question, and is a problem that's faced by many foreign investors in the past who were investing into infrastructure projects in China. Chinese companies naturally want to use PRC law, and if you ask them to pick a place for arbitration, they would prefer arbitration in Beijing, conducted by China International Economic and Trade Arbitration Commission, the CITEC. However, even though Chinese companies now have far bigger bargaining power than they used to have, and they, call the shots when they when they invest in say a power plant in Pakistan or in Myanmar. Nevertheless, they have to take into account the wishes of the local government, and the host government may not want PRC law. And most of them will not want to have any disputes with the investor, with the Chinese investor, to be resolved by arbitration in Beijing. So there is our chance. We have to say that, look, you have to pick a more neutral place for resolving your disputes. Now, as for applicable law, the governing law, I agree that it's not reasonable to insist on using Hong Kong law. However, if you think about, if you are engaged in investing in the infrastructure project, you will know that you need financing. Now, even a Chinese investor knows that. And if you go to the bank, like Standard Chartered Bank, and ask for a $100 million loan on a limited recourse or non-recourse basis, what is the banker going to say? Show me your concession agreement with the local government, show me your turnkey contract, show me all your fuel supply and offtake agreements, and the bankers will vet these agreements, and they will, in fact, they would want to see a draft first, and their requirement is that this set of documentation have to be up to international standard with protection, not just for the investors, but also for the banks, and they would require a governing law to be either English law or New York law. So I would say that yes, Chinese law will not be, will not be considered, and hence usually, English law would be used for documenting a infrastructure project in one of these Belt and Road countries like Pakistan or Myanmar. And then secondly, is the seat for arbitration. Now, faced with whether you want to arbitrate in London or Paris or Singapore or Hong Kong, I think that a lot of Chinese companies would consider Hong Kong favorably, because Hong Kong's arbitration institute, our Hong Kong International Arbitration Center, actually has shown that it's far more cost-effective than than other arbitration institutions. It's cheaper than having your dispute arbitrated in London or Paris, and is more cost-effective than even Singapore. So we are very, very competitive. And as I said, our arbitration awards can be enforced against local parties, and will be enforced by courts of 150 countries around the world, including most of the countries on the Belt and Road region. So I see no reason why your Chinese investor would not want to choose Hong Kong.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. Peter, there's a question for you. I'll read it out for you. Apparently, it is very difficult for foreign SMEs interested in setting up a Hong Kong Limited to open a bank account. Very common question, huh? So, will this situation will improve? If not, will this damage or affect Hong Kong's position as a trading hub for SMEs?
Well, I wasn't expecting that one. Look, this is. I've personally been quite involved in some of the discussions around account opening for SMEs in particular. I'm, as well as working for Standard Chartered, I'm the Vice Chairman of the British Chamber of Commerce, and so the chambers have really sort of got together to try and address this question as well. It's not an easy one. It's very difficult to give you a short answer on the stage like this. You probably think I'm ducking the question, but it's bound up with what, frankly, our regulators require us to do. It's bound up with some of the processes that the banks, particularly the international banks, are going it through to resolve some of the issues we've got with foreign regulators, in particular with the DFS in the United States, which is imposing pretty high levels of customer due diligence and customer onboarding on us. Let me just say, and I speak for Standard Chartered, but I think I speak also for the banking community more generally. We are, of course, aware of this problem. It's been brought to our attention not just by the chambers, but also by the Hong Kong Monetary Authority and by Carrie Lam herself, who has stood up and castigated the industry. So we are acutely aware of it. I do think that we are making progress. It's not an easy problem to resolve. I can give you the statistics. I don't have them with me at the moment. It's not, frankly, as bad as some of the commentators have made out, but that doesn't mean that those who are immediately affected by it don't get very irate and angry. So it's an important situation. I think the authorities in Hong Kong are well aware of it, and the banking community is aware of it, and we are trying to address it.
Thank you, Peter. I'm sorry to ask you this, but in constraint of time, I have one last question for Keith. That is, what is the role of an architectural company like Aedas in shaping the legislation in designing future cities like smart cities?
But this is this could go on all day, but I'm going to keep it very, very short. I believe very strongly it's the role of professionals, not just to do the job that they're paid to do, but also to disseminate their knowledge and their information wherever they practice. And so when we practice within a city, we're always engaged in the universities or with the local authorities in disseminating information and trying to give the best knowledge that we have. It's very interesting that before the 2014 change in direction in China for urbanization, there was a tendency to develop smart cities and equate those to low-density cities. One of the talks that I give, and you'll have seen a little section of it today, is, you know what? Smart cities, and one thing is where you walk to work. That's pretty smart, as opposed to traveling by public transport or cars to work. So there's now a move in China to make cities more dense if they're going to be smart, and hence those hubs that I was talking about. And that's just one little idea. But always along the way, it's up to us as professionals to feed in our best ideas and to influence the way our city is going. Again, as I suggested in my previous answer, for Hong Kong, to support Hong Kong's drive to improve its development patterns as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith. Sorry, because in constraint of time, I have to end the session here. And thank you very much for our speakers for their very enlightening sharing. And please join me to give them another round of applause. Thank you very much. And thank you for your coming to join us this morning. I hope you will bring some, takeaways, have some takeaways back home to see how you can capitalize on Hong Kong advantages in, investing in the Belt and Road countries. And hope to see you all next year, not only in this forum, but also in the Belt and Road Summit. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.